Chapter 5 A Slaughter. The moon was bright and the marsy fires were burning low. My senses sang with every movement in the camp ahead and strained for any sound that might give away our advance. The task of moving so many men into position silently was torturous, but luck was with us and the tribesmen were mostly asleep or drunk. Not a single sentry looked out into the darkness beyond the fires with the legions gathered under the whispering branches of tall trees. The terrain and the need for stealth had necessitated leaving the horses behind, but the equites legionis were drawn from the infantry. Marcus had made sure that all his men were as effective on foot as on horseback. As usual, it was our task to scout things out before the butchery began. We slunk through the shadows, feeling out the enemy. There was no need for silent killing to clear the way. The village below lay unprotected, ripe for the thrust of legion blades. Marcus and I were within a few hundred meters of the village perimeter when the branches to our left cracked. A large tribesman thrust his way through. Marcus held up a hand, freezing me in place. There was no mistaking that the man was a warrior, his body poised despite the effects of whatever he had been drinking. An oversized sword hung at the unwitting Marcy's side. He'd pulled a skin over his shoulders against the evening cold. Steam rose as the tribesman relieved himself into the bushes. Marcus tensed. He slid his sword from its sheath. I dropped low and waited to spring, but I was never given the signal. Marcus was on the man, and his blade was thrust up under the barbarian's ribcage before he registered the movement from the bushes. A woman's voice, mellow with drink and slurred with laughter, drifted through the night. Before Marcus could drag his blade clear or dispose of the man in his arms, a blonde-haired woman stumbled onto the scene. Her mouth opened and her breath hung misty in the air. Before more than a thin screech could escape her throat, I flew from the undergrowth. I hit her from the side with all my weight and threw her down into the moist loam of the forest floor. She pushed back, trying to raise herself, but my jaws had already locked on her throat. A strangled wailing began, but I silenced it quickly with a savage twist. I looked to my master and saw the approval in his eyes. The woman's cries probably weren't loud enough to reach the legionaries waiting behind us, but no sooner had the woman ceased breathing than a horn sounded, and the night was filled with the hissing rush of advancing soldiers. The villagers looked up bleary-eyed at the sound of this first onslaught. Many were dead before they had the presence of mind to find their feet. The soldiers were halfway through the village before the first weapon was drawn. Steel rang against iron and the Roman waves swept on. My sides heaved as I threw myself into the melee. My mouth was soon salted with warm blood as I followed Marcus through the slaughter. Marcus's sword was wet to the hilt. The battle order had quickly disintegrated as the attackers realized the paltry level of the German resistance. Not one villager escaped the eager legion blades. Here at last was revenge for Varus, an end to the peace that had threatened to tear them apart. Somewhere at the head of the expanding destruction being visited on the Marsi people was Germanicus Caesar. He would bring Rome back her honor with massacre and make all who followed him rich. There are some, weaklings and cowards, who would decry that slaughter. None have seen battle when the blood runs hot. My first battle filled me with joy, lifting me like a leaf on the gathering thunderhead of Mars's fury. I bellowed and howled as the blood flowed. And for once there was no restraint. We were all beasts at play, unfettered, and with only the silent stars to witness our raving lusts. Some of the wooden structures around us blazed into life. There was no way to tell whether they had been torched by our own men or set aflame by villagers seeking to deny us spoils. The heat and gouging flames echoed my fervor. I surged on, heedless of the sparks in my coat. At one point a spearman came charging out of a burning hut. Before Marcus could even raise his sword, I leapt. The spear point grazed my shoulder, but I managed to twist in the air, dodging the man's thrust and bringing my teeth down hard on his wrist. Unarmed, the tribesman backed away, trying to take refuge in the burning building. I heard him trip over something and the harsh coughs as he tried to breathe in the smoke. Then, the main beam of the roof collapsed, and he screamed as the house imploded into biting flames. I bared my teeth and snarled at the conflagration, so incensed with bloodlust that it took a firm call from my master to stop me from going after the burning man. It was not in Marcus's nature to take any pleasure in the death around him, but neither would he let weak sentiment distract him from his duty. While others slowed to snatch up spoils or force themselves on squalling captives, Marcus and I plunged on, cutting down the few who had made it to the other side of the mud-choked village. Passing back into the woods was like walking through a veil between one world and the next. The brooding trees muted the sounds of battle and swallowed up some of the bloodlust that had overtaken us. Perhaps Tamfana was indeed waiting in the trees, watching helpless as her people died, and gathering in their weeping souls. Perhaps the respite of the forest was not meant for us. Marcus stood, sword loose and dripping in his hand. His breath came in great plumes, and I realized I was exhausted, as if we had hunted all day. Pain from the cut the spear had made along my side was suddenly fresh and vivid, as if it had only just happened. The assault had taken only minutes, but the cost had been high, an explosion that had left us hollow with its passing. I sniffed the air, but nothing was easily decipherable in the churning vortex of smoke, blood, and reeking fear. It was a child's yelp that drew my attention. I put my head on one side, trying to comprehend the sound. There were screams and cries all around me, but of all the sounds of misery, this one drew my attention. Perhaps because it was the only one that someone was trying to muffle. I pricked up my ears and regarded the trees to our left. Marcus took 2 more gulps of air before noticing. "What is it, boy?" he asked. I whined a response. Marcus's sword came up and we advanced on the noise. It came again, loud enough now for Marcus to hear it over the tumult in the village. "Who goes there?" he cried out, but there was no response. Without warning we came upon the source of the sound. A legionary was leaning over a prone boy. The child was pressed up against a tree, while the man who had cornered him slowly drew a knife over his face. Not far off a woman lay in a dishevelled heap. I could smell the legionary on her, a mixture of sweat and too much wine. I bared my teeth. The man had killed his mate. The boy whimpered as the blade in the legionary's hand slid through his flesh, just below the eye. "What goes on here?" Marcus barked. The legionary looked up. "This little shite stuck this in me." The legionary waved the knife and indicated the blood running from under the hem of his tunic. "I thought I'd show him how it felt." Marcus's face betrayed nothing as he said, "Kill the boy, or don't, but cease torturing him." "Fuck that, he's mine by right." "Even so," Marcus said softly, "I'm an officer, and I order you to stop this torture." "I know who you are, sir. I ride with Drustanus, not your squad. He told us we were free to take what prizes we chose." Then he spoke out of turn. "This is no full campaign. We can't have new slaves slowing our retreat." "Oh, this one won't slow anyone, will you, boy? I'll cut him until I like his face more, then maybe treat him just like I did his mother." "Enough." I gathered myself. I knew Marcus well enough to know that he was close to violence. "I have given you an order," Marcus said. The legionary casually hit the boy's head against the tree and the child collapsed. The soldier then gave his full attention to Marcus. "Drustanus said I don't have to listen to you. I'm his man, not yours." The soldier looked about. "He said you are no proper officer." The knife fell on the ground, and the legionary's hand hovered close to his sword hilt. "I wouldn't be surprised if Drustanus wouldn't thank me if you didn't make it back," he said. "What's your name, legionary?" Marcus's tone was firm, but still even. "Spurius. What's that to you?" The drunkard answered. "Spurius, if your hand touches that sword hilt, you're a dead man." I sensed my master's intent, and let out a low growl. Realization dawned on Spurius's face. "You say that animal of me, and I'll run it through. And while your blade is so occupied, I would do the same to you," Marcus replied. "But it won't come to that. If you draw a weapon on a superior, there's only one fate for you." Spurius looked nervous. "All right, sir, my apologies. I let myself get carried away." "Indeed, I'm glad you see sense now. You'll put me on report, no doubt." "The least you deserve. But it will not be up to me. I'll tell Drustanus of this and let him decide how best to deal with your ill discipline. He may not rate my word that highly, but even he will have to do something about your drunken insubordination." "Drustanus will listen to me before you any day," Spurius boasted. "I don't care if you think he can protect you or not, soldier. You really want to go up on charges?" Spurius thought about it for a moment, then bowed his head and nodded. "As you say, sir. We should probably see if you killed the boy." "Marcy scum!" Spurius gripped the wound in his leg. "His people sealed their fate when they helped to steal our eagles, but he is still only a boy," Marcus said. He crossed to the unconscious child. "A boy who is prepared to fight a grown man to save his mother. That deserves some respect, whatever his heritage." Spurius slipped closer. "So, what are you going to do with him? You said no prisoners." "Mind your tone, Spurius. You are not so—" Spurius's sword cleared its sheath in an instant. Marcus's position was not good. He'd squatted to examine the boy, and he didn't have his feet under him properly. My master was quick, but even he would have trouble countering the treacherous attack in time. Spurius had reckoned without me. I was on him in an instant, my teeth grinding at the bones in his wrist. Spurius howled in agony, and the sword fell from his hand. A fraction of a second later, Marcus's sword burst from the back of the traitor's neck. The dead weight dragged Marcus's sword from his hand. He bent to retrieve his weapon, putting his foot against Spurius's chest. and working the blade to extract it from between the dead man's vertebrae. I worried the now limp wrist, venting my frustration on the flaccid corpse. Ferox! I stopped immediately and came to attention. Trumpets sounded from the camp, summoning the conquerors back. Marcus tarried long enough to see that the boy was still alive. He even went so far as to drape Spurius's cloak around the semi-conscious boy's shoulders. It was as close as he would ever come to offering our enemy aid. The boy kept shivering, even with protection from the night air. Marcus had little patience for this show of weakness. Get up, boy. You don't want to be here when they find him. Marcus indicated Spurius's still limp form with a thumb. The boy didn't respond. You understand me? There was no response. Tears welled in the child's eyes, turning the drying blood in his cheek to long smears. Get up! Marcus bodily lifted the boy and set him on his feet. He stood poised, ready to run, but unable to take his eyes off his mother's body. He stooped and picked up the crude knife that Spurius had dropped and held it out in front of him like a talisman. Marcus snorted and wiped his slick blade on Spurius's tunic. He turned his back on the boy and stalked off towards the sound of the Legion's trumpets. I hurried after him, leaving the Marcy child alone with the dead Spurius. Finally, you're back, CX called as we joined the squad. My master turned his weary eyes on his subordinate. CX was dark and short for a legionary. His ready smile made him look more like a satyr or pantomime imp than a soldier. Many commanders would have striven to crush this roguish streak. My master indulged him too much. I hope that fits your schedule, Marcus replied. CX gave his usual cheeky grin. Not my schedule, boss. It's the chief's. Word from up the line says we brought the sword to the Marsi with almost no losses. Caesar wants to keep going and Gallius has sent orders that we should scout the way ahead. CX gave Marcus an appraising glance. You look like you need sleep, but you're not going to get it. I suggest you sleep in the saddle, but with all the low branches out here. And you would kindly let me ride into them, wouldn't you? Marcus raised an eyebrow and the corner of his mouth twitched. CX was quick to respond. Not I, but Mamersus here has no loyalty whatsoever. I'm loyal enough to point out that the Decurio puts his life in danger every time he lets you ride at his flank, Mamersus shot back. Enough of this, Marcus growled. But there was no mistaking a lightening of the grimness that he had exuded throughout our return journey. I take it the horses are ready. Ready and waiting, sir. Drustanus' squad is also holding back, waiting for a straggler, but the other two have already left and were expected to catch up soon. A shadow passed over Marcus's face. Drustanus, he murmured. Sir? CX waited for Marcus to respond. The others in the squad were already talking amongst themselves in low voices, but CX was sharp enough to see that something was wrong. A few seconds went by before Marcus said, Please send Gnaeus or Sextus to Drustanus and inform him that we have to speak. CX gave a slight nod and sought out Gnaeus with his eye. The rider looked back, no doubt anticipating some task, but CX held up his hand and continued to question Marcus. You look grim, sir. Grimmer than usual, that is. Is something amiss? Marcus let out a long breath. He looked from CX to Gnaeus. Perhaps it's best that I speak to him myself, but it has been a long night, as you say. His eyes dropped to me. Drustanus should be told not to wait for his man. Spurius is not coming back. CX's frown deepened. You saw him fall, sir? Marcus shook his head slightly. I wish I could say it was so simple, but Veritas will not allow it. Marcus met CX's concerned gaze. I ended the little backstabber when he drew on me, but it would be best if I told Drustanus that part myself. Or best if you never told him anything, CX countered. Let Veritas mind her own business. He jerked his thumb in the direction of the village. There are enough buried back there that one more secret will not be missed. Marcus shrugged. Gods aside, we've orders to carry out and speed is of the essence. I can't have Drustanus wasting time on a man who will never be coming back. The man drew on his superior. I fear no reprisal from the truth. It was clear CX was not so sure the matter would be so easily resolved, but he didn't argue further. If you say so, sir. I did hear tell that Spurius and his commander were tight. Perhaps I should send someone else to break this news. CX motioned for Gnaeus. The other rider nodded and handed his mount's reins to one of his companions. He was making his way towards us when I let out a low whine and looked back to the tree line. Perhaps a messenger won't be necessary after all, Marcus murmured. Gnaeus reached us and stood at attention, but CX and Marcus ignored him. Their eyes were on the trees. The sound of horses approaching was soon obvious even to human ears. Within minutes, Drustanus' squad was visible. Marcus strode out to meet his fellow officer. Drustanus? Marcus raised a hand in greeting. Marcus! The Decurio looked down on him from horseback. It's good that you are back and ready to ride. We can waste no more time. Indeed, You waited yourself, though, I see. Marcus glanced at the riderless horse at the back of Dristanis' squad. We did. That drunkard Spurius seems to be even more stubborn than you when it comes to returning to his duty. Dristanis smirked. I wonder what he might be up to, eh, boys? The Decurio squad laughed dutifully, but there was something other than humour in Dristanis' eyes as he spoke of Spurius' absence. Marcus ignored the insult. It is of Spurius that I must speak to you. Concern flashed over Dristanis' face. For an instant I sensed genuine worry, but his bluster returned before any of the men behind him would have a chance to register it. What's this? Don't tell me one of these Marcy pigs knows how to use their pig iron properly. Is he wounded? We'll not wait for him if he is. He leaned closer and spoke low so that only I and my master could hear. If he's gone and got himself in trouble, I'll deal with it. Just don't make so much of it. There's morale to consider. Indeed there is, but this news cannot be hidden. Marcus agreed, then stepped back. I must inform you that Spurius is dead. Dristanis stiffened and made as if to speak. Small veins bulged around his thick neck as the man clearly strove to contain his initial reaction. Marcus kept on, overriding any interruption. I was forced to end his life myself when the man drew on me. Dristanis' face flushed and his hand whitened on his sword. In that moment I knew that he wanted nothing more than to strike Marcus down, but he managed to govern himself enough not to draw his weapon. What is this? He said through gritted teeth. You calmly tell me you killed one of my men? After he drew on me first, Marcus said firmly. I thought it best that you know where to find him so that he can be given all appropriate rights. I will hear more of this when there is time, Decurio. Dristanis barked. Vibius, have the Decurio show you where to find the body. Get someone to take it back to camp and then catch up. I'll brook no more delay. With that, Dristanis whipped his horse's flank with his reins and rode off faster than was strictly safe into the dense woods. The men might not have sensed it, but I could almost taste his pain in the air. Vibius broke from the squad, then dismounted. Decurio. Marcus watched the other cavalry squad go for a moment, then turned to Vibius. He's back in that direction. He pointed out the way we had come. It's only a few moments' walk outside the village, but I'll not waste time on this if his own commander can't be bothered. Get some of the boys from the main legion to help you carry him back. We've more important work to do. Vibius took off grumbling. Marcus let out a sigh. Looks like there will be no time to get cleaned up. Cx put Marcus's horse over and I was forced to run behind as they rode off. I had little fondness for the pace the horses set, but I was young then, and the prospect of fighting for a night and running for a day was not so bad. The shallow wound in my flank ached, but I paid it no mind and concentrated on keeping up with the horses. An easy enough feat as long as the forest made a canter the only safe speed to travel. It was mid-morning before we saw any sign of our quarry. How long would you say since the riders left to fetch the infantry units? Marcus was crouched low next to his horse. The rest of the squad had taken cover in the thick growth around us. CX looked up. Hard to tell where the sun is through these trees, but it must be nearly an hour. They should be here soon, then. Marcus patted his horse's flank. With any luck. We could ride in and slash them up a bit. Beats waiting around here anyway, CX suggested, looking towards the enemy position. No telling what's behind those walls, Marcus said. If you could call them walls, CX replied. He indicated the panels of woven branches that had been erected in the gaps between the great trees. They're just strung between the trees. Doesn't look like they were made to keep anyone out. True enough, Marcus agreed. He studied the flimsy barricades. Then again, the structure could have some kind of significance that we've missed. Best not to risk it. Bang goes the idea of carving them up and running on, CX said. I'm afraid you're right, Marcus said. I think the higher-ups are going to want to see this. Unless I miss my guess, that's one of their holy places. In the absence of any real prize, this would do for a symbolic victory. Careful, you're sounding dangerously political there, CX jokes. My apologies, that would never do, Marcus winked. I heard the distant trudge of our men approaching and raised my head. Looks like they're finally here, Marcus said, reading my reaction. We'll position the men over there to the right. We'll let the foot soldiers do all the work and make sure we're there to ride down any priests that escape. Sounds like we get the boring part of this job, CX observed. After last night you want more killing? Marcus asked. The other cavalryman shrugged. It's going to happen anyway. Whoever gets in there first will get the best choice of booty, he reasoned. Booty? You fancy some ragged badger's pelt or bear's scrotum? These people don't exactly understand treasure the way good Romans do, Marcus said. You mean they value it as much as you do, then? I bet Drustanus would make sure his men got in there first. Ceyx was joking, but there were men in Marcus's squad who had said as much in earnest when they thought they could get away with it. Would you rather ride with him, Marcus challenged, into a rich camp guarded by women and beardless boys? Any day. But when we ride into Hades... Ceyx clapped my master on the back. That, my friend, is a very different story. While the two men had been talking, the legions had encircled the sacred grove. I could hear the wails and hurried prayers from those within, but the gods were deaf to all supplication. The men around me sat on their horses, stone-faced, as the few armed men within the grove attempted to break out of the ring of Roman steel. Once that pitiful resistance was shredded by javelins and swords, the legionaries moved in, slaughtering those who remained. The worst cries came when they set the wooden walls ablaze and made the white-haired priests watch as their temple burned. Marcus's squad took no part in the desecration, and no one made it through the legionaries' line for them to intercept. Our danger came from elsewhere. "Marcus Atratinus, you whore son!" Drustanus' voice came from the trees behind us. Marcus stiffened at the sound of his name. He slipped off his horse and strode out to meet the storm-faced Decurio. I padded after him. Several more of Drustanus' men broke from the tree line behind our squad. They seemed only slightly less enraged than their commander. "You have a problem, Decurio." Marcus was at least superficially unfazed by the snarling man approaching him. "A problem? After you butcher one of my men, you ask if I have a problem?" "We have discussed this incident already. The man refused my orders and then drew on me. I'd given fair warning of the consequences." "You didn't discuss anything, you smug piece of cow dung. I've only your word that things went the way you say they did, and even if they did, you had no cause to defile his body in such a way." The corners of the big man's eyes sparkled with restrained tears. Marcus's brow wrinkled. "What are you talking about? Do you deny it now?" Drustanus railed. "Are you going to fucking stand there and claim innocence when you already admitted your guilt? I should cut your stinking guts out." Spittle flew from the cavalryman's mouth. "I deny nothing. I killed an insubordinate man who was threatening my life. That is all." Marcus stood his ground, unmoved by the hysteria of his fellow officer. "You set your dog on him and then killed him. When he couldn't fight back fairly, no doubt." Drustanus spat back. He came to stand a few cubits from Marcus, his hand clenched on his sword hilt. Marcus regarded him. "Take your hand off your sword, Drustanus." He spoke low so that his words would not carry to the men behind him. "Or I'll make you the same promise I made Spurius. If that sword leaves its sheath, you will die." Drustanus' eyes widened at the threat. "You presumptuous little cur! You dare to threaten me? What will you do, carve me up the way you did my man? Am I to expect you to send me on to the afterlife with my hands cut off and my genitals stuffed into my own mouth? What indignities do you plan for my corpse, Atratinus? Will you let your dog feast on me, perhaps?" Marcus took a step back and made a gesture of placation. "Hold, Drustanus, before this goes too far, I beg you, tell me what you're talking about. I did not deny that I killed your man, but I did none of the things you describe." "Then how was he so butchered when Vibius found him?" Drustanus said through clenched teeth. His gaze flitted over the squad behind my master. He had only brought some of his men, and Marcus's troops had the advantage of being mounted, or else I'm sure he would have drawn despite my master's warning. "I couldn't say what happened to the body after I left it," Marcus said. "I would suspect that the boy he'd been about to kill so bravely took his revenge for his mother's rape and murder." "Boy? What boy?" The mention of the boy seemed to incense Drustanus further. "When I found Spurius, he was about to put out a child's eye for having interfered in the defilement and killing of his mother." "And what business was that of yours?" Drustanus shot back. "I don't doubt you cut down more than your share last night." "I don't believe in torture," Marcus said. "Enough of this! You act the paragon, but child or no, you admit to letting an enemy live, and worse, leaving one of our own to be defiled by him," Drustanus railed. Marcus shrugged. "The dead are beyond such concerns. I told you where to find the body. Can I be blamed if Vibius took too long to find it?" Vibius was one of the men in the group behind Drustanus. He raised his voice in a bark of protest at that assertion. "I object. You gave me only a general direction to search in. I took no longer than any other would have. Besides, you have yet to explain the tooth marks on his sword arm." "Exactly!" Drustanus cried. "No man could have fought fair with such wounds on his forearm. This must have been murder, or are you telling me that along with letting barbarian children defile our dead, you let your hound feast on Spurius's body?" All eyes went to me. Marcus's face split in a scowl of contempt. What nonsense is this? There is no mistaking the wounds. My dog acted to defend me as any good hound would. Will we have sympathy for a backstabber now? For a man who ignores his superiors? Marcus looked about him, meeting each of Drustanus' followers' eyes. I deeply regret that a fellow soldier was defiled, but I will not apologize for meting out the death that was most assuredly deserved for any who would draw upon an officer, and nor will I have anyone condemning Ferox for his loyalty. I gave Spurius as fair a fight as he would have given me if he'd managed to thrust his blade into my back. Must there be more blood? Drustanus glanced back for support. Had one man stepped to his side, I do not doubt he would have attacked our whole squad. His shoulders slumped as he registered the change in the mood of his men. You've not heard the last of this, he hissed. I'll make an official report and we'll see what the higher-ups have to say. That is your right, of course, Marcus agreed. This whole incident should be reported. The men standing at the tree line looked uncomfortable at the thought of their roles in the dispute reaching the ears of their commanders. But, Marcus continued, we probably shouldn't make too much of it. He glanced in the direction of the burning grove. After all, I think our chiefs will have enough on their plates deciding how we will be deployed when summer comes without having to worry about the loss of one murderous legionary. The smoke drifted between the trees, carrying the priest's last cries of despair. It did seem impossible to argue that one body more or less on either side of the coming war was going to matter to anyone.